Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Do you need a web application security solution that can improve your detection rate and enable easier remediation? Acunetics has a fully automated solution that can detect and report over 4,500 web vulnerabilities. Fast and scalable, it can scan thousands of pages without interruption, including HTML5, JavaScript, and single-page applications. Acunetics provides accuracy with the lowest false positives by combining black box and white box testing. For more information, visit acunetics.com/securityweekly. Hard-coded credentials can be trouble, but not as much trouble as a vulnerable DevOps environment. If you want protection without the hassle of security slowing you down, CyberArk, the #1 provider in privilege access security, has the solution for you. With CyberArk Conjur, developers can easily secure secrets across any DevOps toolchain or platform, whether your application runs in the cloud or on premises. Eliminate the headaches of managing secrets and try Conjur open source for free with no strings attached. Visit conjur.org/ASW to get started today.
Welcome back, everyone, to the news segment for the week of October 14th. One of the things right out of the gate for all of our listeners, especially those in the development world, go patch your Git version on your terminal there. Go do it right now, because right now they've got a Git desktop and command line client vulnerability for arbitrary code execution that actually is pretty trivial and also pretty bad. Paul, I know that you probably caught this, but they shot you down a little bit on Paul Security Weekly. Did you get a chance to read into this at all? Because I'm happy to go deep.
Yeah, I tried to cover this. I want to say it was on Hack Naked News, and I feel like that I did a disservice when I covered it, because I don't. It sounds like that if you run git clone from your terminal, that someone can include other submodules, and the definition for those submodules in the config for them, if they put a dash in front of something, it actually executes a command.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So effectively what it is if you name one of your files or basically your folder structure using a dash inside of it for some reason, you can actually cause it to then read through and execute on your code as what is interpreted as a flag on the, like, say, a git clone command. So if you git clone -- recurse - submodules, and then you had one of your submodules be packaged in there as like a -- like something, like one of the git commands, something else, maybe like SSH : /o proxy command, and then pull down a vulnerable repository inside of your cloned code.
I gotcha. Yep.
Your owned.
Gotcha.
So this is actually similar to the previous CVE 2017 1000117, actually, which was an option injection vulnerability. So there's definitely a problem now with Git modules where basically, if you add your module in, or your module gets pulled in by something else, and you've got a naming structure in your folders that includes those dashes, well, it can throw it for a loop, which is not great.
So basically, this means you'll be pulling in code that you didn't intend to include, and then go compile it. I guess it depends on the language, right?
This way, like if you've got a Node project, so you've got a bunch of, or you've got an Angular or a React or whatever project, right? And you've got a bunch of Node modules, and they've got all submodules to your Node modules, and so you pull down the project, you include or recurse those submodules to be included inside of whatever you're pulling down, right? So now it's also going in and pulling down additional submodules that you might have had up on your GitHub. If you've got one of those maliciously named, or if someone has maliciously renamed one of them, suddenly you're going down and performing commands that you actually didn't intend to perform. So there's definitely badness here if you don't do it right. So Yeah, this affects a lot of things. So you want to get to here, jokingly, get to version 2.19.1. There are backports for 2.14.5, 2.15.3, 2.16.5, 2.17.2, and 2.18.1. But my recommendation is go for the latest of 2.19.1 because they're going to build off of that one going forward. But GitHub Desktop as well as the Atom editor is something that you want to go ahead and make sure you update as well, just
So
because
if you
they're all
haven't
effective.
updated, you should get on that.
You should get on that. Yes, Paul, you should absolutely get on that.
It's so
So
punny.
there are so many opportunities here. We should get to the next story. Which is, in this case, Paul, the social media site Google Plus, which I'm sure not a whole lot of people use, but as it turns out, more than just a few, is being shut down.
Yeah, I think
Not
Larry's joke was when I said that Google Plus had a breach affecting its users. He was like, "Well, all two of them? Is that they're both up and on?" I think my story was the users. That's what it was. The users had filed a lawsuit against Google for this breach, and Larry's comment was, "What? Both of them got together and decided to file a lawsuit."
So the way that this actually went down, ironically, is so first of all, they're not shutting it down immediately. It's being shut down by the end of August 2019, which I find kind of hilarious, right? Like they have the opportunity to just like nix it right now, but apparently that's not.
Oh, so
they're
giving both those people time to move to a different platform, right?
Well, so interestingly, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually like Google employees that were probably using it somewhat, but up to 500,000 Google Plus users were exposed to outside developers.
Oh, it was 500,000. I thought it was 500 million. I was like, no, wait, there's no way they have that many users. Yeah.
Nope, definitely not. Otherwise, it would be a much bigger deal, right? They probably wouldn't be shutting it down for that matter.
But did they also phase out Hangouts? I heard that. Like Hangouts was going away for some. They're changing a lot of their. Yeah, I think they realized that they haven't gained much traction. I mean, and if you look at like how we're using social media and collaboration, as I'm sure many are, social media for us is Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Collaboration and communication is Slack, and video is now we're moving to Zoom. Yeah. Nowhere in that list do you see Google services, right?
Right, exactly. Which is, well, except for email, maybe, but
email, sure.
Still, like most people are doing that, and more people are doing the Slack thing. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all goes down, especially because they've invested time and money into Google Plus, and while they've got 500,000 users potentially affected. What was interesting to me though is there's no evidence that there was anything like malicious that actually happened here. But back in March of 2018, they noticed. So March of earlier this year, like I don't know, 7 months ago now, they noticed this glitch. And the glitch allowed developers to view users' names, email addresses, occupations, genders, and ages. So it wasn't like a breach where a malicious actor came in and actually, stole the authentication token in the case of like the Facebook breach that recently happened. It was more of like developers of perhaps third parties that had access to some of this data could view this stuff without necessarily the right permissions to actually go about using it. The thing that I found kind of scary about the whole situation is that a Google memo to a senior executive that was released in this article basically says that the company's legal and policy staff advised that disclosing the breach could lead to quote unquote immediate regulatory interest, and it could draw comparison to Facebook's Cambridge Analytica scandal. So as you remember, right around that same time frame, this all happened with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing. And Google was like, no, we don't want any of that. Just stay quiet about it. And their whole thing with especially the Google Project Zero is you've got 90 days. That's it. So that's what they're being hammered by. I think a lot in our industry right now is you didn't even follow your own timelines. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, it just wasn't. It wasn't good news for Google all around. I mean, there's the data breach, and then it kind of underscored the fact that Google produced a service that no one's really interested in using anymore.
Right.
So it just all around it was bad news for Google. I really, in the context of this show, again, I think for collaboration we use Slack, right? And Google services, Keith brought up email. I think Google Cloud is another one that I don't feel like it's gaining widespread market adoption. However, it could be a viable platform to deploy your applications to. Keith, I don't know in in your work, if you, or in talking with other people in application development, if it's a viable platform for that.
Not really. I mean, GitHub or Jira or Bitbucket or all those other things, like a lot of people are moving away from Google products because of the creep factor, I guess, is kind of the way that people are starting to experience it. So I've had friends as well that are, security professionals, and they've had Gmail addresses, and suddenly they've said, "Do you know any good alternatives to Gmail?" And it's like, well, that's interesting because you don't hear a lot of people moving away from Gmail for things, but people are just starting to say, okay, like they have way too much access to the stuff that I talk about, and with all these breaches going on at these very high-profile companies, I'm less sure of the idea that I want to use their services now.
Right.
And I will say, contrary to that, though, for startups or small businesses, the Google Productivity Suite is actually pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the email is pretty good, spam filtering is good. The calendar tool is, I really enjoy it. Even like slides, right? Like, so whenever we put together webinars, Paul, like working off of that is pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess, we've kind of we've beat Google Plus into the ground, and it is now retiring, which is great. So in the meantime, though, Facebook, with that breach that they had recently, has basically confirmed that they have something like 5 million European users that were actually affected by that breach. What is interesting about this, of course, is with GDPR coming live back in May, they now face potentially a $1.63 billion fine as a result. And I get the feeling that the European Union is probably going to take that stick and beat Facebook over the head with it. What do you think, Paul?
I think they're sitting there like this, like, ha, 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 I told you so.
Right?
Like, this is their first juicy target they can sink their teeth into and make an example of, so that from this point forward, everyone protects everyone's data, which
you'd think, right? Or they stop doing business there.
Yeah, or everyone leaves Facebook, which, I mean, I think a lot of people are, but, there are those of us that will stay because we have businesses, and in order to have a page on Facebook, you need to have an account. So,
right,
I guess you could limit what you put into that account, certainly, but then you run the risk of Facebook going, yeah, you're not a real user, so we're going to shut your account down. Which is the other, interesting thing about social media networks, is it can go away at any time. From the developer perspective, if you've ever interfaced with some of the social networks at an API level, is also really ridiculous. And there's actually a lot of good privacy controls in there too, but you still need to have an account, and you need to get permissions if your app is going to do anything fancy. So it begs a lot of questions about, I think, the business and application usage of these social media services. They're very volatile. You can get your account banned at any time, and maybe you're going to see that more often as Facebook faces this fine now. Maybe the hammer is going to come down on the entire Facebook network to make sure that things are legit.
Well, not to mention that, I mean, they've had a whole series of problems this year alone when it came to the Russian influence campaign scandals, Cambridge Analytica. Now, of course, the whole loss of those authentication tokens, which, by the way, so this is story number 3 under bugs, breaches, and more. But story number 2 under if you build it, they will come, talks specifically about how this has now been determined to be more of a targeted attack as opposed to just kind of an attack for opportunity. So what I found interesting, Paul, under story number 2 there for if you build it, they will come, is in this case the 14 million accounts, or rather, excuse me, the 50 million accounts originally thought to be breached were really only about 30 million after they did some more incident response there. But of those 14 million of those 30 million, so about half of those actually breached accounts, they actually took the extra step of harvesting more data than was initially thought to be the case. Rather than just the authentication token, they actually took things like profile data, users' stated religion, their birth date, their employer, relationship status, including the last 15 searches of the victims that had their authentication tokens stolen. The searches that they were performing on Facebook were also taken by the attackers. What I thought was interesting, though, about all of this is toward the bottom of that article, it talks about how, for half of those accounts that were attacked, the 14 million, the hackers didn't stop at simple email addresses and phone numbers. They pulled down language settings, hometown, current city, as well as, of course, the type of devices that they're using to actually connect to Facebook, geographic locations. And so in this case, they're working, according to the fourth to the last paragraph, they're actually working with the FBI on an investigation into this, because this apparently appears to be targeted, not just, targets of opportunity. So I think there's probably going to be more to this as we learn more. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, and I think it segues into the next story about Facebook, where they want people to be invited to invite their camera into their homes in competition, I think, with the Amazon Echo. I won't say the keywords because people hate it when we do that. But when Facebook comes to market with a very similar thing, you put a camera in, talk to people, and talk to it. Now the trust is at such a low level, due essentially to application security and having breaches, right? They've eroded the trust. Maybe not so much so that they're going to lose a ton of market share, and that's really just because of the sheer number of users that they have. And they're going to lose trust with their user base adopting new products that you have to trust the provider. And certainly anytime you put a camera or listening device in your home, you have to trust the provider. And so this article that you put in here, Keith, basically speaks to the point of, like, why would you ever trust Facebook to put this device in based on all the things we were just talking about?
The timing of this whole release of this product, for one, seems tone deaf to me, right?
Yeah.
You've got the Cambridge Analytica thing, you've got the Russian influence campaign scandal, and then suddenly you've got this other breach that happened, and now you're finding that it was actually a targeted attack, and now you want people to say, yeah, go ahead, bring this camera and video screen into my household. I don't know. It just seems totally tone deaf to me. And you're right, Paul. They're meaning to play in the market of the Google Home devices or the Amazon Echoes, and they're trying to break into that space as a follow-on to Google and Apple's success, who followed in turn from the Amazon success as well. So I don't know. I don't know why you would even bother to release this now. Why wouldn't you sit on this for 6 months unless they're trying to hit the holiday market sales?
That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. Someone made an executive decision.
Yeah.
And said, screw those paranoid security people, we're releasing anyway.
Right? It's just okay. By all means, if it flops, it's on them, right? The thing that I found kind of interesting about this, though, is they are actually using, or the models that they're selling, use Amazon's voice-activated digital assistant to do all the connections. Which I thought was kind of weird, right? They're using, I'm not going to say the word, but they're using the digital assistant provided by Amazon to actually do all of the hands-free stuff with their new camera. So I don't know if there's a partnership there that's subtly being revealed, probably, or what, but that was kind of weird.
That is weird.
But the other thing that they note as well is the portal is what it's called. It connects through Messenger, meaning that people that don't necessarily have a portal themselves can still make use of it. So it's kind of like with FaceTime, you can only talk to other Apple devices, but with Portal, anyone with Messenger you can potentially use that with.
I can create as many portals as I want with my portal gun.
There you go. Perfect. So the thing that I found interesting about this as well, though, is in here they actually call out specifically that Facebook says it won't listen to, view, or keep the contents of video calls, which I don't know. Right. I get the feeling that they just might.
And this is after it came out that when you put your phone number in for security purposes, it was used for other purposes. Again, that speaks to eroding trust continually.
Yeah, right. It's just I don't know. And then on top of that, of course, they also say that, and this actually gets to the food for thought story number 3, commit strip comic, which is there's also a physical camera cover to prevent recording. It makes me feel so much better, Paul. They sell me a video camera talking system that I put a camera cover on because I don't want it to record me.
Yeah, because they know, people aren't going to trust it, so we'll just give you a cover for it.
I know, right? So it's totally good. It's not listening at all to anything going on in your household whatsoever. Trust me. Yeah, I don't know. I can't believe that they're thinking this. I can't believe it's coming out. And I, for one, am definitely not going to buy one for anyone. And I might just disconnect them from my family members' households if they happen to buy one themselves.
I might even trust PHP more than I trust Facebook. Maybe.
I know, right? That's exactly where I wanted to go next. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
How's that for a segue? Every once in a while, I think I get it right, but...
So trusting PHP, both dangerous, but probably less dangerous than trusting Facebook at this point, even though around 62% of all internet sites, that's all the internet, run unsupported PHP versions or will be running unsupported PHP versions in about 10 weeks. So
I
you're
was
thinking,
like, yeah,
right around the end of the year.
a lot of people have PHP apps, and then Keith is like, yeah, Paul, it's called WordPress. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
like 60% of that 62% is WordPress, and the other 2% are other weird things that might still run on PHP. Maybe not. I mean,
Joomla.
that's a
They
gross
actually called
overstatement. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of. Again, I don't think it's. I think when we see that, we think, oh, people are developing like their own PHP apps. Largely, they are adopting pre-configured commercial or free software that just happens to run on top of PHP.
Yeah, and in this case, it's funny because the article specifically calls out some of the problems that WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal all have,
Yeah.
right? So if you think about that 62% of the internet, a large portion of them are made up by WordPress and then probably some follow-ons with the other two. But they're talking specifically about the default kind of supported versions. And Joomla supports all the way back to PHP 5.3, whereas WordPress supports all the way back to PHP 5.2. And the one that's going basically out of style here is 5.7. So just in time for Christmas,
yeah,
we're going to get unsupported PHP versions for 62% of the internet, Paul. I am so excited.
That's it begs a question in my mind, Keith, as we talk about all these new hipster frameworks, as I'll call them, and I call it that to try and be funny. I mean to poke fun at anyone, well, maybe a little, but so we've got all these new hipster frameworks, right? What would it take to rewrite WordPress or implement some kind of CMS system? I'm sure they exist, but like feature parity wise, are they probably that far behind, or is it just market share? I don't know if I haven't looked into this personally, but
so I haven't looked into the CMS space really all that much, to be honest with you. But there definitely are ways to do this with some of the forthcoming JavaScript frameworks, right? Like it might take a little finagling to get it right, and it might not have all that fancy, different, like the themes and stuff that you can add. Like all those things might be, forthcoming per se. But yeah, there's ways to do this now that are easily self-managed and self-maintained in languages and frameworks that are probably a whole lot more secure than soon to be unsupported PHP.
Well,
and definitely more secure than that Facebook camera.
It would be an interesting test, though, to see if it did breed as many security vulnerabilities as we can sit here on our pulpits all day long and say, well, it'd be more secure if you just wrote that in some newfangled JavaScript framework. But then you think about how a CMS works, Keith, right? It has to accept a lot of input. It has to manage users, a lot of user input, register accounts, talk to a database, read and write to a database. All those are recipes for insecure software, essentially.
Well, so the beauty of this is that frameworks like React, for example, do a really good job at things like input validation and output encoding. So there goes a lot of your user input problems. And then on top of that, if you use object relational mappers, suddenly you're getting rid of a whole lot of the footprint around SQL injection flaws, right? So there are much better ways of actually developing code today with modern frameworks, specifically the big three, Angular, React, and Vue. Than there is for most of the other languages out there. So you wouldn't go write one of these things in Flash. You probably shouldn't be maintaining or writing any of these things in PHP anymore. And if you are, I hope it's PHP 7. Because yeah, it's just all bad. December 31st, guys, I guarantee you the first CVE in 2019 will probably be a PHP 0 day. So,
and it's, the development time it would take to rewrite an advanced CMS in a new language is probably really daunting. I mean, you think about the number of lines of code in WordPress and all the functionality that's there. I'm sure there's people trying. I'm sure there's probably a dozen companies in Silicon Valley that have gotten some kind of funding that probably have no shipping product, but that have tried to make the world's next, CMS to displace WordPress. And I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I poke fun at Silicon Valley and funding and all, but I really hope one of those players succeeds. And we start seeing a new player come about to push out these old, archaic PHP language-based frameworks and CMSs out of the picture, would be my hope.
I mean, I get the feeling that what's going to happen is eventually either WordPress will turn around and be developed in a JavaScript framework at some point, or it will go the way of Flash and die like a slow, horrible death, and it will just leave, more than half the internet vulnerable to
Yeah,
badness.
you say that,
Um,
except their REST API is still not fully functional, and you still have to use XML RPC. So
which, by the way, is also super vulnerable, and I found
yes,
it in a
yes.
lot of different places.
Because I was
And
talking with
XML has
Wyatt,
single
I'm like, we
entities.
should be using their new REST API. Like I saw the announcement. He's like, yeah, it's not ready yet.
Right? Yeah. No, XML RPC, you want to find XML external entities, injection attacks all over the place. Yeah, find the nearest company's marketing site that's on a bug bounty program and have fun, because they're all
Yep.
over the place. It's insane. So again, make sure you have permission, specifically if you're doing it through a bug bounty program, that it's in scope. But yeah, they're out there. I found them myself. They're fun to report because it's just like, what were you thinking? And then you're like, oh, it's WordPress.
Yep.
It's probably the marketing teams. So yeah, there's that. So a couple things I did want to cover though as well, Paul, is in this case, Microsoft is open sourcing its patent portfolio, which I thought was amazing. By the way, for those that go and click on the link under Learning and Tools #2, I believe this one is actually like it's got an autoplay video to it. So definitely like kill your sound and then go and click on the link and then you're good. Because I really hate autoplaying videos. But I think it was something like 60,000 patents are now being open sourced for Microsoft,
Wow.
which is crazy.
I wonder if that means that are they going to go after? Are the patents still valid?
So that's the thing that I'm not really sure about here. So in this case, in 2014, Microsoft made approximately 3.4 billion from its Android patents, for example, which I thought was kind of weird. But it sounds like to me that by open sourcing the patents, maybe it means that they're not actually going to go after people for the patent use cases, unless
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's another enterprise company. So like if you're maybe a small startup or an individual that wants to use something that's in the patent portfolio from Microsoft, you're probably okay. But if you're like a Samsung or Google or Facebook, for example, I imagine that they might still try to license the use of those patents to the larger companies that should or and can be paying for it. But I thought this was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I mean, I'm curious to see what the restrictions would be on usage
Yeah.
of those so-called open source patents.
Yeah, I don't know entirely. I admittedly have not read the full article through to completion, but for those of you that are interested in going and reading more, it's Learning and Tools #2 on this week's show notes. The other one, though, that I wanted to talk about, which I thought was hilarious given our conversation just now with Garrett, was food for thought #1: DevOps producing more insecure apps than ever before. Well, yeah, as I think you said, Paul, earlier, fail fast, right?
And this was, my initial reaction to DevOps. I was like, yeah, so we can write more crappy software faster and deploy it, write it and develop it and push it to production faster. And I think once you dig into DevOps, you realize that the entire process gets faster, which includes not just creating, but fixing bugs as well. And that it's an iterative process and that feedback loop is so important. Whereas we're not talking about that as much. And I like this article because it kind of brings back that concept of when you're first exposed to DevOps, you kind of think, well, great, we can produce more crappy software. But it allows, I believe it now, that it does allow us to produce better software. However, if it's not implemented correctly, Keith, I think you can very easily fall into this trap of producing more crappy software more quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing is with this is actually a vendor related bit of research. So, take some of this with a grain of salt. It's basically off of their customer base. But one of the things that I kind of pulled out of this was that 70% of every application is comprised of reusable software components, according to, the scan results that this vendor provided. So that I thought was telling, right? Because if you have watering hole type attacks, as we've seen in the past, I mean, we've talked about them on this show, that really becomes a very big problem very quickly, especially like if you've got badly named Git submodules,
Yeah.
for example.
For sure.
So the other thing as well is some of the vulnerabilities that they call out as the top 4 most likely was information leakage, which, if you're in the GDPR zone of Europe, big problem. As well as content spoofing, not as much, but cross-site scripting still exists for some reason. It baffles me entirely. And then, of course, insufficient transport layer protection. I don't know why most companies aren't using HTTPS today, because let's face it, like going out and getting a Let's Encrypt cert is really, really easy. So
Yeah,
it seems
and
like some of these
you
problems,
know,
Paul, should be pretty easily solved. I don't know
yeah,
what you
like
think.
our hosting provider as an example, they have a free option for a cert, right? And I mean, for some of my other properties, not Security Weekly, like I'm going to go pick and choose who I use for CA for that one, right? Because I know it's for security professionals, and likely a lot of them are going to check that kind of stuff. But for some of the other properties, it was just bundled right in with my hosting provider. So I'm just like, I click and it's free, and you register and you're SSL protected, right? So I think for some sites that's appropriate. For other more higher security sites, you may want to be selective as to who you use for a CA and whatnot, and that just makes the process easy.
One of the things that I did find in this, though, Paul, to perhaps go back to our conversation a moment ago as well, related to DevOps building more insecure software into the environment, was that they actually found something like 50% of those organizations, or rather, excuse me, those organizations that successfully embed security into the DevOps experience had a 50% drop in their production-based vulnerabilities, and fixed times improving as much as 25%, right? So it's to the point that if you include security appropriately, you now have less bugs, which is good, and you fix things faster, which is also good. That's the whole
Yeah,
point of
and it's
DevOps.
exactly, that's the benefit of DevOps, right? Is I can produce things more quickly and more securely, like winning all around, right?
Done,
Yeah, that's the
right?
goal.
Just done.
You have to do
It's
it
like,
right,
yep.
as we talk about on the show, but yeah, that should be the outcome.
You have to be able to use an API instead of XML RPC, for example.
Yeah.
Not to beat a dead horse there, but the last one that I want to point to is, of course, the commit strip cartoon this week, which is, of course, talking about the new Facebook home camera. I think our listeners will enjoy when they go check that one out, because it's funny. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to update your Git and then git commit and stay classy.